I'm John DeMont, a columnist for the Saltwire Network. On Bay Street, they call Wes Hall the fixer. And that's because he's integral to so many of the big deals that come down the pipe these days. But he also is very interested in fixing one of the endemic problems in Bay Street and in big business in Canada, anti-black discrimination. You should also know that his resume is ever expanding. He is the newest member of the newest dragon on the Dragon's Den.
Yes, sir.
And he also has his first book, which is called No Bootstraps When You're Barefoot. Thanks for joining us today, Wes.
John, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I love that title.
It is.
And I love the book, which I read. It's wonderful. The title is catchy, and it also has the virtue of being true, because despite your elevated status today, you did literally start barefoot in Jamaica.
Start barefoot. Back in the day when I was raised in my grandmother's tin shack, we didn't have shoes to wear to just run around or go to school with shoes on, because you don't waste shoes like that. Shoes are for special occasions. It's amazing how...
You have great shoes today, by the way.
I got great fancy shoes today with fancy socks on. But it's amazing how when you are of a certain status in life, that certain things are a luxury. Right? For me, shoes was a luxury. And now a Ferrari is a luxury.
Right.
Times
do change.
Times change a little bit.
Yeah.
But it shows you how much when you go through life, how you appreciate those little things. I used to appreciate Sundays. Because Sundays was when I get to wear that outfit on the cover.
Wonderful.
That's the outfit I would wear.
That's very
put
cool.
some shoes on. And
I don't think you've ever topped that outfit, by the way.
No, I still can't. I've tried, but I still can't. And you got to be able to pull it off. It's not a matter of just putting the outfit on, right? It's all the finesse that comes with putting it on.
Yeah. And tell us about your very early days, because this is a story of barriers, of someone, overcoming barriers, overcoming discrimination. It was hard from the very beginning.
It was. The book started out by me being abandoned in a house by our mother. My 4-year-old sister was the eldest at the time with us, myself at 18 months, and my brother Ian at 6 months old. And we were left, and there was a pot of porridge on the stove that my mother left. And then she just left and never came back. And my sister and myself and my brother were crying. And my sister was trying to figure out, okay, how do I feed these kids? Because the porridge is done. And a neighbor heard us crying and came over to see what was going on, and realized that, we've been abandoned. And he went to the plantation to get my grandmother, and that's how my life kind of got started, really, in a tin shack with my 4-year-old sister, my 6-month-old brother, just by ourselves.
Do you ever get over that, or is this something that those beginnings, not just humble but hard, is that what drives you to this day?
It made me who I am.
Yeah. So tell us about that. How
because
so?
A lot of people get resentful. Think about, I remember my daughter was doing a project on homeless people in the city of Toronto. And I was sitting down there with her, and she was interviewing all these people as to why they became homeless. And they were talking about situations that I went through. Being abandoned, being abused physically and mentally, thrown out of the house at a young age as a teenager.
13?
At 13. Those are things that happened to them. And it affected them mentally and affected them for the rest of their lives. And they never recovered, because the only thing that they could think about is just what happened to them. And to me, the only thing I could think about, they were just angry about it. When my grandmother came to get me, she was 60 years old. And she already had 7 of my nieces and my cousins that she was raising at the time. And she had 6 of my mother's kids as well. And she was 60. And she was working on a plantation, and she wasn't resentful. So who am I to be resentful for all the hardship that I went through when she wasn't resentful for her hardships? She didn't take it out on us. And that's the natural thing to do when you're resentful about something, is to take it out on others. So that's what we do when we're hurt over the years, is that we tend to kind of repeat that cycle by hurting other people as well. So I decided to use my grandmother's example of not being resentful, so that I don't hurt other people as a result of me being hurt.
But those hardships, those hard things you went through, they harden you. You said that's in a certain way, being black and probably being black and having had these hardships is your superpower.
And I think in some cases, John, I was hardened, and in some cases I was softened. I was hardened in the sense that when someone tell me I can't do something, I'm going to defy them, and I'm going to get it done. So when someone say you can't do this because you're black, I'm hardened. I'm going to do it in spite of you. And it softened me in the sense that when I see somebody in the position that I was in, I now have empathy. And if I can do something about it, which I can, I do something about it. So my philanthropic work that I do is as a result of that softness that I see from my grandmother. But that hard-nosed, get-it-done attitude, that's what she was. She went to the plantation, she did the hard work, she went to her garden, she planned stuff to sell at the market, and she was tough in terms of how she was raising these grandkids. And so that hardness, don't take no for an answer, just keep pushing. That's the part that I kept with me that got me this far.
How lucky were you to have her as your grandmother and your role model? And it seems to be the singular figure in your life. Would that be accurate?
Well, if it was my mom that I had, I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
I would be hardened.
Yeah.
In a bad way.
Yeah.
I would be one of those.
She was angry.
Yes, I would be one of those repeat offenders that do the same thing that she did to me to other people. Yeah. Because there was no softness for her. My grandmother had that hardness, but she also had the softness as well. So she was the single, the most influential person in my entire life. Yeah. Because it's not that she influenced me when I was living with her from she got me at 18 months old to 11, but that I learned with her from that, 18 months to 11, stayed with me for the rest of my life until this day, this day. And yet, all those negative things that happened, like the experience with my mom, those 3 years, it wasn't enough to permanently scar me. It wasn't enough. It
might have permanently scarred someone else.
It might have somebody else.
Yeah.
But if those people look at the people in their lives that did really good things for them, they're probably going to focus on those people that have done some good things for them, as opposed to the people who do negative things. And so it's all a matter of perspective. As we go through life, and even though we're talking about systemic racism right now, all the people that helped me along the way were white people. So, but I'm not going to sit here and say systemic racism doesn't exist, because there are other people who have never met people like those in their lifetime. I'm just fortunate enough that I've met some of them, and they were able to help me. But I can't sit there and say because they helped me, systemic racism doesn't exist, and as a result of that, you can make it too because I made it.
Yeah. How important has moving to Canada been for you? Would you have had this kind of success? I'm sure you would if you're anywhere else, but
no. I would beg to differ, John, because poverty is a disease, but it's a curable disease. When I was in Jamaica, working on the plantation, because I used to go to the plantation with my grandmother, okay, and I couldn't be educated the way that I wanted to be educated because I didn't have the money. So to me, my life would have been a plantation worker's life. Yeah. My grandmother worked there, my brothers were working there, my sisters were working there. I would be working there as well, because that's it. Poverty determined where you fit in society. When I came to Canada, that condition was cured. I no longer had the disease of poverty when I came here. So as a result of that, I felt that I could be whatever I want now. I could free education. I could go to high school for free. If I'm smart, I could get a scholarship to go to university. And then I could just fight my way up to the top because my grandmother taught me to fight. So as soon as I solved that poverty problem, I could be whatever I wanted to be. But here's the thing that changed, that was different for me, that maybe is very different from people who were born in Canada, because they weren't born in poverty like I was in most cases. When I was in Jamaica, growing up with my grandmother, when I went to school, my school teacher was black. The principal of the school was black. My brothers, if and when they got into trouble, they go to the police station, the police officers were black. The sergeant of the station was black. And if they go to court, the judge was black. The defendant lawyers, the prosecutors were black. We did business with black entrepreneurs. We go to the bank manager is black. The bank tellers were black. Everybody we saw in positions of authority and influential positions, they look like us.
Right.
So when I came to Canada, for example, when the poverty situation was cured, I kind of didn't feel that I couldn't be a lawyer, I couldn't be a doctor, I could be whatever I wanted to be. I could be an entrepreneur. But my brothers who were born here and my sisters who were born here, they didn't have the same attitude because they didn't see any role models that looked like them, anyone that they wanted to be like when they grew up. So that kind of affected them mentally to say, well, how dare you dream to be a lawyer or a doctor or a business leader when you don't see anyone there that look like you doing it.
And Bay Street was worse than probably most places.
Well, you know, I always say that Bay Street is kind of PMS. You know, it's really a pale, male, and stale, right? There's that. It's.
I will steal that.
Yeah, it's that because that's what Bay Street has been, and it's getting a little bit better today. But historically, it's really middle-aged and older white men.
Yeah.
Not even women were there.
Right.
Of any color. So that's changing a little bit now. But we still have a long ways to go whereby it's a really inclusive place. I was talking to a senior executive on Bay Street 2 weeks ago. And he said, you know, I took my family to CNE, the national exhibition there in Toronto. And I saw Toronto represented. Every color, you name it, was represented at the CNE. And then I said, but what happens when you come to your office on Bay Street?
Right.
That representation isn't there. And I literally asked, have you thought of why? And I said, that's the reason why we have the Black North Initiative, so that we can make sure that our boardrooms, our C-suite, the pipeline represents the country, the city that we live in. I'm not going to, if we look at, for example, one of our clients, Fortis, is one of the pledge signers. Well, there's not a lot of black people running around in Newfoundland. Okay, there isn't. But they signed a pledge that says that we're going to be inclusive. And we're going to make sure that we look at indigenous people, black people, in our organization at very senior levels. Okay? And they also committed that 3.5% of their board and their C-suite will be black in Newfoundland. Now, they have to work very hard to make that happen. But guess what, for the people in Toronto? They signed the same pledge.
Right.
But 9% of the population in Toronto is black. Their pool is bigger. So shouldn't that be happening faster? Yes, it should be, and it will be, but ultimately, it's all about people being intentional. And so at the Sick Kids Foundation, for example, I'm on their board in the Sick Kids Hospital, we decided we're not just going to do the 3.5% because we have a bigger pool to choose from. We're gonna make that number 8.5%.
Wow.
And guess what? We've exceeded that number already.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So that pledge that's key to the Black North Initiative. What's the uptake been like in Atlantic Canada?
Well, so we have 11 companies. I mentioned Fortis, Chorus Aviation. There's a numbers. I know Sobeys.
Tend to be the bigger companies.
The bigger companies support it. There's some smaller companies on the list as well that have supported it. But it's really not about making black people rich.
Right.
It's not about saying we want black executives only. When somebody signed the pledge, what they're saying to the public is that we have an inclusive organization. And if we're welcoming to black people, guess what? We're welcoming to people of color. We're welcoming to indigenous people. We're welcoming to women. We're welcoming with people to people with disabilities. That's what you're saying. You're publicly stating that you have an inclusive organization. So it's not just about saying we want black people here. We want everybody here, but we're going to start with the most underserved. And if we fix the problem with the most underserved, others are going to be able to.
It's a leveling.
It's a leveling of the playing field.
Yeah,
yes.
Very interesting.
And I always say to folks, you know, if because people say systemic racism doesn't exist, and I understand that if you don't live it. If you go into a store and the red carpet is rolled out to you, nobody's thinking that you're there to steal anything. If you're going into a hotel to check in and people don't think you belong there, you know, of course you're not going to think systemic barriers exist. But if those things happen to you time and time again, the question that you have to ask yourself is why? Why is it that I walk into a hotel and I'm treated very differently when they didn't even ask me if I can afford to stay here, but I have a reservation? Yeah. I'm here for a reason. So systemic racism or systemic barriers mean that there's certain people that are treated differently because it's built into the system to treat those people differently for whatever reason, whatever biases that people may have. Some people's bias is that he's not as smart as I am.
Right.
If it's poverty, some people may say, well, look at where he came from. He's poor, he was poor, but I'm not anymore.
Yeah.
But that stigma of starting out life that way haunts you to some people.
Sure.
And so we have to break those barriers down constant to let people know that, you know, those people may have that station in life, but it's up to us to know, who know better or are doing better to help those people, not to look down on them.
One last question. Nova Scotia has a large and historic Black community, faced the same kind of barriers you're speaking of. You know, some would say it's probably the barriers are greater for Black people in Nova Scotia. What would be your message, just in a general way, to the Black community, Black entrepreneurs, people who want to have the same sort of arc or, you know, the same sort of impact that you've had?
Well, as I say to people, that my book wasn't written as a roadmap as to how to be successful. The book is written to show people that nobody should ever have to take that journey at all. So for those people who are actually in that boat of struggling and fighting to get recognition, it's a constant struggle. You know, the thing about the glass ceiling is you break it, and guess what happens? Somebody fixes it right after. Right? That's the reason why people have to continually break the glass ceiling. There's somebody coming behind you to fix that glass ceiling. And it's the same thing with systemic barriers. People like myself and others who have made it can't just look back and go, well, it sucks to be you back there. We have to pave the way, and the next generation following us have to pave the way. But it's never going to be a situation where we go, it's fixed. Somebody's always going to try to fix a system that's broken. And our job is to make sure that we try to fix that system that's broken. But there's always going to be somebody who's trying to break it again. Because they go, it's just, we want it like that. We want it broken. We like it like that. It helps us. So those people here in this province in particular, they have a deep history of discrimination. Viola Desmond, we know her example and so on. And it's 400 years of that. But in this country, for some reason, Canada, we feel that we're very different. We're very different than the United States, and that's the danger when we feel that we're above somebody else who is doing something wrong, when we ourselves are doing something wrong as well. So I think if we acknowledge the fact as a society that there's some people in this country that are treated very different than others, okay, let's figure out why and let's fix the problem. For example, when we look at the indigenous people in this country, 48% of the federal prison population, women prison population, are indigenous women. 32% of the federal prison population in general are indigenous people. How could that be possible without there being a systemic reason for it? We know that as a society. So let's look at the deep causes of that and fix it. Instead of saying that we don't have an indigenous problem in our country, we do. It's deep and it's problematic. And it's been here for centuries. So let's just figure it out and fix it as a society and not bury our head in the sand, which is what we're doing.
Great. Wonderful. Wes, thank you very much. Congratulations on your book. Good luck tonight, I guess, which is Thursday night?
Thursday night.
Thursday night, your debut. Wonderful. Great.
That's right. Actually, this is my second season on the show. So,
I see, okay.
Yeah, and, you know, I'm encouraging all entrepreneurs to just watch it.
Wonderful.
And being the first Black person on the show for 16 seasons it's been on. And when I got on, so we're getting there. Baby steps, baby steps.
Wonderful. Okay,
right, John.
great. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
I'm John DeMont in Halifax for the Saltwire Network.